Welcome everyone to University Parents with Janice and Jenn. I'm Janice and we have Jenn Skelding with us, and we've been hosting this for the past couple of weeks. And
hi everyone.
Hi everyone, and we're happy to have you here. And this is a resource that we're offering to incoming families and current families, just so you can be more in the know about what's happening, what resources are available to your students, so that you can best be that parent that is able to support your student no matter what they're going through, whether it's like academic support, emotional support. Mostly this is for the academic support. And today our topic is working with accessibility, and I'll let Dave talk about that more. So Jenn, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce our guest. Today is Dave Stinson.
Okay, hi all, I'm Jenn. I'm the Executive Director in the Learning Commons. And the Learning Commons at Trinity has 7 functions, 7 different areas of responsibility. And one of the largest and one of the most important is the Center for Accessible Learning. So when we introduce Dave today as our special guest, he is a director in the Learning Commons and a director of Accessible Learning. But accessible learning is not just for students with disabilities. And I'll ask Dave some questions to be talking about a particular function. It's a research-based academic term called Universal Design for Learning that we also employ at Trinity. So we'll give him a chance to share his expertise in that area too. Happy to have you all here, and really glad that Dave is with us today. Dave is my partner in my work, and we are a very strong work family, mom and dad of the Learning Commons, if you will. So happy to have Dave join us today. Janice, would you like me to just jump right in to introduce Dave?
Well,
or allow Dave to introduce himself?
Well, you can allow Dave to introduce himself, but I remember Dave when I was a freshman at Trinity, not putting Dave on the spot as being older, just that he was so young when I was at Trinity. So we're very similar ages, I'm sure. But when he was at Trinity, when I was at Trinity as a student, he was working here, and I loved him. I got to meet his kids as just a young dad, and now they're grown and my kids are grown, and it's been fabulous to work with you, Dave, and I'm excited to have you here with us today. So Jenn, why don't you introduce Dave?
So Dave, I'm going to kick it off with the first question for you. Tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do at Trinity, how long you've been at Trinity, and then Dave, I'm going to challenge you to share, why do you love working at Trinity? What is it? What's the secret sauce for you?
Okay, I'm Dave. I've worked at Trinity for 36 years now. Excuse me, and I've been here because a number of reasons. Primarily, I love the students, but I think also we've been a growing institution, and there's been a lot of ability to change and move and grow. And so I love growing as personally, and it's allowed me to do a lot of that. And so that's primarily why I'm still here. And I think working with college-age students is one of the best groups to work with, and I love it. So I don't know if that answers your question. I was going to comment too, my son just got engaged on Monday, so we're talking weddings now too.
That's exciting. Yeah, we're picking up my daughter's wedding dress today, so lots of unique things happening during the unusual days, for sure.
And Dave, I really was doing a plug for me in that. Like, surely there's something about working with me. No. Oh. I'm joking, everyone.
You need to know, we love each other. It's great. I love working with Jenn. And Janice as well.
We just don't get to see each other anymore. So when we show up in these Zooms, it's actually very fun. Same goes for Janice. Janice, I turn it back over to you to get the questions going.
Excellent. Okay, so Dave, if you could help me understand, what is accessible learning? What is that? Can you explain that to our parents?
I'll try not to make this too long. I've been working in the field of disabilities for many years now, and initially they talk about a medical model and the idea that you're not well if you have a disability or that kind of thing. The reality is that we all have our own limitations, whatever they are. I've got mine. I was never a great student in a lot of respects. So But what I needed was accessible learning. I needed to figure it out my own way and understand what that looks like. So one of the things I'm involved with, and the university is very intent on, is universal design. It kind of sums up a number of philosophical things, but basically the idea is that if we design things really well for all people, then a lot of people can access them. And it won't matter if they have a disability, it won't matter if they have a strength or a weakness in one area. It will serve all students better. And so part of what I'm involved with a group internationally, but also within Trinity, trying to make things as accessible as possible so that students can easily access regardless of who they are. It's just really good design for a broad group of people. That's really what we're trying to do. So that's what accessible learning is. If you want to look it up on the internet, Universal Design for Learning is what it's called.
Okay, and I understand you're at articulation today. So thanks for breaking out for us. What does this mean for you and for Trinity Western?
Okay, so it's kind of interesting because we're one of the few private institutions and the only Christian institution that attends articulation. Articulation is when all the universities in the province get together and we discuss issues around how to provide better access, what our best practices, all those sorts of things. And so we have provincial meetings going on for the next 3 days. And we typically do these in person, but they're Zoom meetings now. And so I'm basically at articulation. And what we get from that is I begin to understand what's happening at other schools and how they do things and make sure that we're on track with what best practices are out there. I'm also on provincial committees. We're looking at I'm working on one where we're determining what's best practice for accommodations in clinical settings. So that's the kind of thing that we talk about.
Okay.
Dave, the Center for Accessible Learning is not just a one-man show. Who are the people on campus that keep their eyes on accessible learning for students? Can you introduce us a little bit to who's working in this space?
The people that I work with specifically are Laura and Marlene, Laura Brown and Marlene Friesen. They take care of most of the accommodations and work with our students directly in providing those in a face-to-face environment. Now everything changes when you go online, and there should be greater accessibility online because it's asynchronous, meaning you don't have to be there at a certain time. There's greater flexibility for when you get things in, that sort of thing. So Laura and Marlene are the two people that I work directly with, but really it's the responsibility of the whole institution. And so every faculty member has to design their course with a good deal of flexibility and accessibility in it. It's about IT. What kind of IT programs do we have that provide that accessibility? It's about processes right across the university that allow for flexibility and access for all students. So all of us have eyes on it, and part of my role is to try and help people to really think it through and provide advice when they need it.
Awesome. How do students gain access to accessible learning?
Okay, so specifically the people that I work with do have disabilities. There's a fairly simple process. Basically, I send they have to first self-identify. So typically, parents can't identify for the student. They have to say, look, I have a disability, and come to me with that. You can facilitate it. You can help with that process. The process is simple. I have a little intake form. It provides contact information, that sort of thing, but it also allows the student to request accommodations that they believe would be helpful for them. Then I need documentation of a disability. My role is to kind of look at both the requests and the documentation to see what makes sense, and in a conversation with the student to try and come to some agreement about what accommodations the university will provide.
Okay, here's a scenario, and I know this is a true story. My friend's son showed up at Trinity with 2 broken arms. So no prior academic learning disability, but that is a disability. What would you do in that situation? Can't write, can't.
It's not classed as a disability, it would be
Okay.
classed as a concession. So we make a differentiation. A disability is kind of a formal diagnosis.
Okay.
But when there is a concession, there needs to be a real reason for us to provide an accommodation. And so concessions provide for that.
Thank you. And what about funding? We've got students that are coming to Trinity, and I know there's probably funding available, but what does that look like for our students?
Funding is mostly related to where you're from. So if you're in Canada, it's going to be related primarily to the province you're from. If you're from the US or a country, you need to look for the supports that are available through the student loan program, those kinds of things. So I'll speak specifically about BC. In British Columbia, there's a student to get money from the government basically has to have $1 of need, which means they basically go through the student loan program because that allows them to determine what numbers, how much money you have, and if when they put the amount of money the student has against the cost, if there's $1 of need, then they're eligible for student loans. So I would encourage anyone from BC or in Canada, because it's a federal program, to look at the the Canada Study Grant. To access it, you must get a student loan. So even if you have $1 of need, you're able to access that, but you would access it through the province that you live in. It's federally funded, but provincially administered. So I would really encourage you to look at that through and talk to our student aid people, because they understand the student aid, student loan side of it. And I'm happy to help with the disability side.
Dave, there are a couple of questions in the chat now that I'm going to ask and have you answer. The first one is, how recent does a diagnosis need to be for a student?
It's really dependent on what disability you're talking about. Normally psych eds, which often people ask me about, so psychoeducational assessment needs to be done within the last 5 years. Especially if it's done when a student is under the age of 18. If it's done after the age of 18, then it's considered permanent. Other things, depending on, so mental health issues, we're looking kind of at what's the situation right now. So that's kind of, so we would require more up-to-date documentation, but it would be more from a person who's treating the student. So it is somewhat dependent on what disability you're talking about or what the issue is.
So basically,
no
Dave,
answer, sorry.
You approach things on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
And assess individually for each student.
Yeah.
Okay. There is another question in the room about helping a student that's not a very good reader. No reading diagnosis per se or disability, but are there any programs on campus to help with this? Or how do we go about supporting this? I'm going to let you start, and then I'm going to add in some additional resources from the Learning Commons there.
Okay, so my recommendation is that the computer is actually one of our best friends for anybody that has a weakness. I end up using Macs, and so that's what I'm aware of, and the voice dictation and voice software is really good on a Mac. I believe it's quite good on a PC, but I haven't actually used it. So the recommendation that I always have is use your computer to the fullest. When you think about if you go into the, what is it on mine? It's into the system preferences and look for the accessibility piece. It allows you to do two things. One is to listen to the text. So it will read almost any text, PDF to e-text, those kinds of things. Very helpful for a person that's not a very good reader, because they can follow along with their eyes and they can listen. So you're using multiple senses. The other thing with the computer is you can do voice to text. And it's awkward because it won't give you sentences the way we like to talk. But what it'll do for a person with a writing disability is it'll allow for a good flow of information. So a lot of people that struggle with writing actually communicate really well verbally. And if they can just write down, take a section of what you want to write, speak it, and then go back, put in the capitals and periods and all of that, you'll get a good flow of what your thought is. So usually the hang up is putting it on paper through your pencil or through typing. So that's the kind of thing. I think the computer is your best friend. You can get e-texts as well that are helpful. So that'd be my comment. Over to you, Jen.
Thanks, Dave. I am just going to reinforce that the technology is a way for universal accessibility for everyone. And every student at Trinity, and sometimes they don't know this, but every student at Trinity has Office 365, Microsoft Office 365 provided free for them. And in Microsoft Office 365, that's something that first-year students are normally encouraged to download and add the apps regardless of their device. It works on the phone, not as well, but it works on the laptop, on an Apple or Android or PC. And there are so many features there that students can explore and use. For instance, even just this week, I've been exploring how to use Microsoft Notebook so that I capture pieces of emails and I can capture them into tabs to organize my emails to look like a binder full of notes. And then the technology will actually read aloud the notes and I can highlight into themes and organize and categorize. And so, I mean, I'm not an undergrad student and I'm using these tools for better accessibility. So what we've been contemplating and considering in the Learning Commons is how do we support students to develop that type of understanding of the technology that's at their fingertips as well? How do we help them to skim and scan or read deeply for understanding? How do we help them, to engage with a highlighting system or a tech solution? All of those things. So when a student comes and presents that, oftentimes we pair them with one of our coaches, one of our learning strategists. To sit down and think, okay, what's your best way to access this? And that doesn't require a disability, doesn't require documentation. And so those accessibility features exist for all students.
Let me jump in with a couple more comments. One is, and I've written a book, but this is one of the ways to proof it is to listen to it. You can always hear the mistakes way better than seeing them. So think about doing that in terms of proofing what you're doing. Second thing is, and Jen, maybe you can help me out. I don't know, have we gotten Blackboard Ally?
I believe it's coming, Dave.
Yeah, okay. So Blackboard Ally is a really interesting piece of software that is in our learning management system that we are in the process of obtaining, I believe. But it does all kinds of things that will help people. Again, this is universal design. It'll help people of all types with their schooling. One thing, for example, it'll translate stuff, and I'm told it's really good. So if you are studying in a native language, you could take an English document, translate it into your home language, and have a pretty good idea that it's pretty solidly translated. So there's things like that in Blackboard Ally. Sorry, I forgot the title. Blackboard Ally is coming, and I think there's a lot of stuff that you could use.
Awesome. Okay, so I have a question for you. What are some success stories? I know this department has been growing, and I know you've got stories that would be meaningful for parents to hear. What are some success stories about accessibility or accessibility learning, GPA, sliding doors, relationships, that kind of thing?
Okay, accessibility has to do with the physical campus. We've put some new sliding doors in a number of places. Typically, what we've done in the past is to put door openers with the little button. And these are door openers that have the infrared sensor and just they open. So we're moving that way on a fairly regular basis now. We're not putting in the door openers with the buttons. So that's actually a very costly thing to do for the university, but I think it is evidence and kind of shows where we're at as a university and what we're trying to accomplish. Second thing, there are tons of really good examples of people who have done well that have disabilities. I don't have the data in front of me, but I did check on grade point averages of people that are assisted through my office. And I believe the retention rate is way higher with those students. And many of them graduate with very high GPAs. I think the average was about 3.0 when I averaged all of them out. So there's some huge, like, from my perspective, the people that have disabilities are quite amazing. They work way harder than a lot of other people because they have to, but they are very successful and they have a lot of persistence. I think of one student I'll just highlight had incredible ADD, and when she talked to me and explained what it was, she had letters that would jump on the page, like the letters were all jumping. And she devised a way using colors and other things to actually get through 2 master's degrees. So I'm just amazed at our students. They're incredibly good, and I think what they've achieved and are achieving is quite amazing.
Awesome. We have lots of resources available. Can you help us understand how parents can find these resources?
Be more specific in terms of resources. I mean, we have a Learning Commons page, and I think I have it up here somewhere. Josh, now I've lost you.
Dave, do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
And I'll put the Center for Accessible Learning up.
Yeah. Most of the information that you'll need is on our website. And it's fairly, it's not a lot of new stuff. So so if you're looking for the brand new stuff, there's not a lot, because essentially we're trying and we continue to make things work. So the laws haven't really changed, but we continue to shift and make things better. So you've got the Office of Teaching and Learning.
Sorry, Dave, I don't know if you can see what I'm seeing. I'm looking at the Center for Accessible Learning page. Is everyone else looking at that on their screen as well?
The Office of Teaching and Learning.
Teaching and Learning. Well, hot dog. All right, stop for a second. Sorry, friends. I'm having a real challenge this morning with screen sharing. I did put the link in the chat. Does everyone have the link in the chat? I think I'll leave it to you to find it that way.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're always such a polite crowd. People never really tell me that they're not looking at what I'm looking at when I share the screen.
We don't always know what we're supposed to be looking at, so.
Well, and the other thing I would say is, if you have any questions, if it's not on the website, then please just shoot me an email or give me a call. Well, mostly it's email, because you'll just get my answering machine at the school and it'll send me an email. So, but leave your contact information and I'll get right back to you and we can resolve any questions that you have.
And your email is stinson@twu.ca?
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that in the chat too.
Sure, sounds good. STINSON@twu.ca. Okay, my last question for you, and then we'll open it up if anyone else has questions. Because of COVID-19, has there been anything else that you've had to do differently during these last few months? Or how have things changed as a result of COVID-19?
Well, lots of things have changed. And to be honest, we're still navigating what this looks like. I think one of the real pluses is that because we're going online and things are asynchronous, meaning that they're not face-to-face and things don't have to happen at a certain speed, that there's a lot of accessibility built into that. We have been talking at the university to faculty about design of the course and how do you do summative or major tests at the end. And we're not encouraging necessarily using multiple choice. more assignments and regular kinds of assessments. So there's actually a lot of change that is happening. And again, it goes back to universal design. This will help all students, not just people with disabilities, but people with disabilities hopefully will find that things are a lot more accessible because of the redesigns that have been happening across campus.
Well, that's great. If anyone else has any more questions, but yes, Jen, please.
Yes, I have a question. Dave, will you go back and please share a little bit more about what are typical accommodations that students might receive, either through a documented disability or through a concession when there's a short-term piece? What are the kind of more common accommodations that are granted?
So many of them have to do with face-to-face classes. Extended time on exams is very common because often if there's a writing or a reading disability, it just takes more time to do it. It doesn't mean that the person's mind isn't good or anything like that. It just means it takes more time. And there's no real reason for us to be testing the speed at which a person can write an essay or something like that. Some of these things in the online world aren't as big a deal because the assignments are more things like open book exams, write an essay, integrate information that you've learned in certain ways. And so it changes a little bit online, but extra time on exams is a regular occurrence. We have a lot of students that will write up in the Center for Accessible Learning, and that's to give them a little bit of a different setting that's both more private, but also just the fact that it's a different setting. They aren't triggered as much because it's an exam in a classroom, that kind of thing. Often use computers and voice technology. Those kinds of things are fairly common for people with writing and reading disabilities. So there's a whole bunch of things like that. I'll just mention a couple of things that we typically don't give as accommodations at the university level is a lot of people want flexibility on due dates, and typically we don't give those because at the end of the day we all have to meet requirements. If there's a real strong reason, if a person's hospitalized, then yeah, there are exceptions that can be made, but typically that's not one of the upfront accommodations that are made.
Thanks, Dave. One other thing that I just I have a couple of incoming parents, and if your child has just finished their first year, one of the things that students struggle with the most when they come into university is how to make notes. And I legitimately say make notes, not take notes, because making notes means that you're listening actively to the professor or the understandings that's happening in the room, and you're transforming it into your own meaning sense on paper. One typical accommodation may be that a student has a note taker assigned to them to give them an additional source of understanding to help them throughout the learning process. But as we shift to online and in this flexible multi-access space, that changes a little bit, because some of the technology pieces, like we mentioned earlier, can actually pick up some of those things. And so it's a bit of an exciting time and also a bit of an ambiguous time, but making notes for the parents in the room who are the first year students coming in, that's essentially important. And in the Learning Commons, we offer supports to help them figure that out and to try different research-based approaches, because that's a critical key for success in your learning. Here's a question here in the room. If the classes in the fall are online only and a student has issues with ADD and can't complete the assignment, what happens then?
I'm not totally sure what that means. They can't complete an assignment. Basically, and I don't know if it means an extension. Much of that's going to be worked out with the professor. So I'm sorry, can you maybe clarify a little bit more what you're thinking?
Yeah, the question wasn't stated right. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine.
So if a student has some challenges with ADD and they have to get all these resources and help online, how would that look with if you have ADD problems and you're getting distracted by the things coming up on the computer, or if you can't focus on something, so you get distracted and go look at something else or go search something else. So just with all the temptations on the computer to go watch videos or this or that, how can a student with ADD learn and on the computer?
That's a really good question, and Jen, you can help me out on this one. It is a distracting environment for a lot of students, so we all know that. I don't know that there's a simple answer. I think students need to have a really strong purpose for what they are doing. So this might sound a little bit like I'm going a different direction, but I think if there's a way to really encourage the purpose and the reason for why a student is in their course of study, and if they can find a way to navigate how they will use what they're doing going forward, that can be very helpful. So I would actually encourage talking to Joelle, who's our career counselor, and trying to get some sense of that. And I'll just, on a personal level, I was a kid who, I didn't have ADD, but I sure couldn't study very well. And so one of the things when I got to university was I decided that I wanted to work with people. So literally every class I would go to, I would be asking myself, okay, how can this help me in my role working with people? And I worked for a grocery store at the time. I was doing a color theory class in art, and I was working on displays. We changed how we did the displays, and we sold way more. So the point is, if there's a way for your student to have a really strong purpose and figure out how to integrate some of this stuff, it makes it far more interesting. So I don't know, Jen, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I'm going to reinforce what you said earlier, Dave. When a student starts to navigate accessibility and accommodations, Dave sends a letter to the faculty member to let the faculty member know that accommodations are in play for the student. Now, this feels very vulnerable for a student, and then the student, it's shared with the student before the email goes out that the student should have a conversation with their faculty member about what's happening, and so that the faculty member is fully informed. Now, what feels vulnerable for a student is going to a faculty member and saying, you know, I struggle with ADD. The online environment is actually they engage with empathy with a student, and they listen and they say, okay, what can we do to adjust that for you? How can we chunk your assignments or put it into add-on timelines for expectations if you submit. Also, this is where the connection becomes very important, because the coach can work with the student to enact a plan.
I'm not sure if it's just me. Is Jen frozen for everyone?
I think so.
For us.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah. She was kind of just delayed there. Okay, and I think
It sounds like she has some more to say.
yeah, you know what? It's amazing
What
what
happened?
technology you can do, but we did lose her. It looks like we've completely lost Jen.
I'm
So
in,
maybe
I'm
I'll-
here.
Oh, you're there. Okay, we lost you, Jen. And
we lost.
there you are. And boom, she's back. But your last little segment was delayed or didn't happen. So, but
I'm sorry.
it's okay. It's just technology. It is what it is. So
What did we miss? So the faculty and the coach coach relationship helps the students enact a plan for focused attention, for time management, for prioritized learning. The coach becomes incredibly important for a student.
And a student has to be willing to go and get the help, right? That's the hardest part for parents, is if your student is not willing to get the help they need, you're kind of helpless, because you can prod and push all you want, but if they're not willing to go get the resources that are available to them, then they're just not, and they're not going to succeed. So the resources are there. Dave Stinson and his team, working with accessibility, are there. Jen has set up a great group of coaches. They're like, the resources are there. The more that parents can know, the more supportive they can be to their kids about that, then that's great. But it's no good unless people use it, and they are using it. And when they do use it, they see a greater success. So thank you for being part of this today with us. I think we're going to wrap up now, but if people had questions, they can definitely email Dave at stinson@twu.ca. And yeah, did anyone else have any final questions before we wrap up today?
No, just thanks to everyone for providing all this information. We look forward to working directly with Dave on our son's success in the fall.
Yes, we hope it's successful too. That'd be wonderful. Well, blessings on each of you. Have a great day,
Yes.
and join us next week. If you know of others who should join us, 11 a.m. next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.